Hi, I'm Brett Johnson, former United States most wanted cybercriminal, now good guy, and host of the Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode, a CISO's guide to federal prison, when we come back. All right, so we are back to the Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode, a CISO's guide to federal prison. Ha! You can credit that title and today's subject to a Mr. Rudy Rouhana, an attorney, an outstanding individual, an attorney, a CISO as well. He was seeing some of the chatter over on LinkedIn regarding Joe Sullivan. Joe Sullivan, the former CISO of Uber. Joe Sullivan, the criminal now. Joe Sullivan, the former federal prosecutor who absolutely knew what the difference between right and wrong was and decided to throw that shit out the window and break the law. Joe Sullivan, the guy who Uber gets breached. Joe Sullivan says, don't worry about it. We'll call it a bug bounty. You two criminals who actually broke into us, I'll give you $100,000. You signed an NDA. You don't talk about it. You just tell me that you didn't steal any data. We're going to be good to go. And I'll make sure nobody knows your names. Yeah. Then these two criminals go off, and what do? They decide to hit other companies while Joe Sullivan knew who the hell they were and kept it hidden. Needless to say, Mr. Sullivan got in a little trouble over that. So there was a lot of chatter on LinkedIn from all these tech people, honestly, taking up for Sullivan. They were like, I don't know what the hell they were thinking. They were like, he's being charged for the breach. No, he wasn't charged for the breach. He was charged for breaking the law after the breach. Mr. Rouhana, he reached out to me. Rudy's an outstanding guy. He reached out to me kind of in a joking manner. Hey, you ought to make an episode called A CISO's Guide to Federal Prison. And I thought it was a stroke of genius. Genius, I say. Ha! So that's today's episode. You will find us. You'll find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. You'll find us on Rumble, Facebook. You'll find us on all these different platforms. The one platform you will not find us on is YouTube. That's right. The one platform I started on, I was banned from YouTube. And the reason I was banned, they cited episode number 48, which is sugar daddy dating and modern prostitution. Now, I'll be honest with you. The video that I recorded did have some nudity. I actually captured some of these sites where these human traffickers frequent, stuff like that. I didn't think it was over and above anything horrible. Anyway, there was some nudity. In 2020, looking backwards, I could say maybe I should have did that. But my thought is that I wasn't really banned for that. My thought is that they were looking for a reason to get rid of me, and I gave them the reason with number 48. They may be out to get you, but they can't get you if you don't give them a reason. Well, I gave them a reason, and I think that they were looking to get rid of me because I had been talking for the past 4 or 5 episodes about how law enforcement had been not doing the right damn thing. Today's show, CISO's Guide to Federal Prison, goes into that idea of doing the right damn thing. Joe Sullivan was a former federal prosecutor turned CISO. He knew more than anyone else in this industry what the difference is between right and wrong because he put wrongdoers behind bars every single day. He chose to break the law. Not only that, but he chose to cover it up and let others be victimized while he knew who the criminals were. It stuns me. It truly stuns me to see people on LinkedIn take up for that guy. It does. Now, you can like him. He can be your friend. He can be whatever. But understand that this dude did wrong. This dude, his actions caused thousands and thousands of people to be victimized. He deserves the blunt force of whatever Justice Department, the DOJ, can do to him. That's what he deserves. Now, that being said, we'll talk about some of his sentence. We're going to go right into the Rudy Rouhana interview. From there, once that's done, I'm going to come out. I'm going to give just a couple more pointers, probably on how to handle yourself in federal prison, because Joe Sullivan might need it. But, you sent me the note for A CISO's Guide to Federal Prison, and I thought it was an absolute stroke of genius.
Well, you were what happened is, I rarely post anything on LinkedIn, social media. And, but when I logged on that morning, my whole feed was just one after another. And what struck me was that you basically had two general themes.
Yeah.
One, oh my God, we can go to jail for a data breach, which is 100% missing the point of that particular case. And then two, which I thought was interesting, without naming any individual names, there were quite a lot of folks that were, defending the individual, right, Mr. Sullivan, that was convicted, and, saying, well, what about the CEO of Uber?
Right.
What about other people? And again, maybe valid point, maybe more people should be prosecuted for this. But just because someone else is involved doesn't necessarily alleviate your responsibility in what went on, right?
Well, let's I tell you what, I'm now recording, and you're already giving me really good content. So let's go ahead. Let me get the show started, and we'll just talk like this, and then we'll talk about what it's like in federal prison and what they should be prepared for.
Right.
And then go from there. So I'm just going to introduce you, and I'll film the actual opening once we get through with our talk and everything. All right.
Okay.
All right, so we are back to the Brett Johnson Show. Today's episode, a CISO's Guide to Federal Prison. And the gentleman who gave me that inspiration, my muse for this episode, is joining me today. Now, Rudy, I got to tell you, I'm not quite sure I know how to pronounce your last name. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and we don't say things right over that way. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
So it's pronounced Rouhana.
Rouhana.
And, I am in Indiana right now. So I completely understand, the inability of people from Kentucky to, pronounce names properly.
Well, now hold on. Are you from Indiana? Like Bobby Knight, Indiana?
100%.
I liked Bobby Knight. I got to say, I liked him. We really didn't like him when he was on the court against us, but as a coach, the man was something else until he started to, throw chairs, throw people out.
Students, yep.
All right, so you got up with me the other day on LinkedIn, and you sent me a message basically of, hey, have you ever thought about doing a CISO's Guide to Federal Prison? And that was because of the news of the day that was going around, and we were talking about that before we started recording right now. If you could just kind of recap your morning so everyone knows what was going on.
Yeah, Brett, like I was telling you, I logged on, as many people did, to LinkedIn that morning. And, usually I think our feeds are filled with the typical, vendor pitches and things like that on there. But that morning I logged on and I saw post after post after post of people essentially freaking out for all the wrong reasons, saying that, oh my God, as CISOs, we can go to jail.
Right.
And for a data breach, but specifically for that, which, instantly when I saw that, I had an idea of what case they were thinking about. And I know like the fact pattern involved in that and the charges that were brought against, Mr. Sullivan had nothing to do with the data breach itself and everything to do with the handling of that.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing that we need to make clear on this. You're not going to go to prison for a data breach. You may very well go to prison for perjury, lying, all these other things across the board that you try to maybe hide the data breach or something along those lines.
Yeah. And, you had asked me a little bit about my background. I've been, this particular case is one I've always followed because, I started off my career after consulting. The first company I went to was Credit Karma. where I was head of the compliance program. And Credit Karma at the time was under an FTC consent decree. It was specifically the first, mobile application security FTC consent decree that had been instituted.
Okay.
And my hiring and my role there was to build up the compliance and security program in order to meet the requirements for this consent decree. And very similar to the one that Uber eventually went into as well, which is a 20-year agreement audited every 2 years. And then in particular for, Mr. Sullivan's case at Uber, he's one of the few CISOs such as myself who are also attorneys.
Right.
I was never a practicing attorney, federal prosecutor like him. But at the same time, I understand, when you have that kind of background, regardless of whether or not your role is acting as counsel inside the company, you still have an awareness of legality and ethics, more so than maybe someone who doesn't have that background.
Right.
So
let me stop you for a second because we're going to get a little deep in the weeds with this conversation. Sure. If you could just give the audience, because a lot of listeners, they will know what's going on with Sullivan, with being the CISO of Uber and the specifics. But for the listeners who don't know, if you could recap that for everyone so we're all on the same page.
Yes, that's a good point. And go back in time a little bit, right? So what happened in 2006? Actually, no, in 2014, Uber had a data breach that the exploit that was used was very similar to one that was used again in 2016. So they were already on the FTC's radar in 2014.
Okay.
In 2016, a similar breach happened. I think, close to 60 million customer and driver data was said to have been taken by the hackers in this instance. And that included, not just names, mobile phone numbers, and things like that, but for the drivers, right, their driver's licenses, which, that's a whole, different level of PII.
Right.
And, in general, there's no federal requirement, I don't think, to disclose a data breach, but there certainly are state requirements. And I know in California, where Uber is headquartered, they're gonna fall under that requirement.
Right.
And what happened was, rather than disclose this to the public, the individuals that were impacted, the FTC, and I can go into some more details in terms of the opportunities they had to do that to the FTC, they decided to pay a $100,000, as they framed it, bug bounty to these individuals, and subsequently also have them sign an NDA and also a statement stating that they deleted the data that they had received. So everything there seemed a little bit out of place. $100,000 was way more than they had paid as bug bounties previously. I think the previous limit that was mentioned was $10,000.
Right.
The NDA, I don't think is as non-standard as it's led to be portrayed, because if you do use formal bug bounty programs like BugCrowd or HackerOne, I believe they have some type of NDA that their particular testers that submit bug bounties through their programs kind of agree to regarding disclosure. But all in all, they did this to essentially keep this incident under wraps, keep it away from their legal organization, their executives,
from reporting,
outside counsel, FTC.
Right. So they get hit.
Yep.
So that they don't have to have bad press, lose trust, get in trouble, report the breach to the press, everything else like that. They go ahead and they pay the attackers $100,000. We'll call it a bug bounty. You guys sign an NDA. Tell us you've gotten rid of all the data. We trust you, and everything's going to be just fine.
Yep.
So that's not got a damn thing to do with. Geez, man, I mean, just the, oh my God, you get hit And instead of just saying it, hey, we were breached, this is what happens. At that point, you decide, no, we're going to run for the hills and do every single thing we can to cover it up. I mean, that's what that sounds like to me.
It more than sounds like. It's what they were able to establish, in court, at least to the extent that they were able to convince a jury of it.
Okay, and let me ask you, because you were over at Credit Karma, same type of position. What's the thought process that causes an individual, instead of just saying, hey, we were hit, what's the thought process that gets them to say, no, we need to keep this hidden and try to hide it, and but break the law in covering it up?
That's a good question. And before I kind of dive into the answer there, I do want to, caveat, I can't put myself exactly in someone else's mind to figure it out, right? So I'm just completely spitballing. If I had to guess, though, I don't think it's like concern about his particular job and job security or money. And I say that because, prior to being at Uber, he was at Facebook. So he had, a top end position.
Right.
And even in light of the incident that happened at Uber, he was still able to go and get another job at Cloudflare, right? Became the CISO there.
Was there any indication that his previous jobs, any behavior like that would have been present?
So the only thing that I have read, and this was from an NPR article, they kind of mentioned that, in terms of, behavior that kind of talks about, his mindset as a CISO, it seems like he did go beyond what's typical of what a CISO's responsibility would be in terms of securing information. And, it went so far to, make product suggestions to the engineering organization, for example, saying, hey, you can use their smartphones to track how they drive, right? If they're being reckless.
Okay.
And that's a great idea.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with suggesting that, but it also just kind of, say that he's someone that's thinking about data and thinking about some pretty liberal uses of it, which, when you have a responsibility to curate and protect data, one of those things is that you're only collecting data that you need for your application to function.
Right.
Right. And he's thinking about lots of different ways of being able to kind of use that in ways that, maybe people didn't sign up for originally. So that makes me to think that, maybe it's pure reputation. I don't want to have my name tied to this breach, and it's not about money. That's what I think it is. I think he had a very high end career. Right. Facebook, Uber, top companies. I think it's probably just reputation and character.
I get that. I do. I understand that as a motivator. I have been in similar situations when I was a criminal. Is there any indication that it extended beyond him, this bug bounty cover-up idea?
Yes. So, looking at some of the facts in the case, it does seem to state that he did inform Uber's CEO at the time, Travis Kalanick, who, we could have a whole other show talking about everything related to Travis.
That's true.
But aside from notifying the CEO, I didn't see anything where it talked about, notifying anyone in top management.
Okay.
Now, he did obviously notify people within his team, because some of the facts there are why he was, led to his conviction, right? So he specifically told people on his team that we can't let the FTC know about this, right? So it's not just, hey, we're working on an incident response. We're working under attorney-client privilege. We need to keep this, close, right. Which that makes sense. That's what you sometimes do in an incident response situation. It's specifically saying we cannot let certain people know. And these certain people are, regulatory bodies that just apparently 10 days prior, he had meetings with knowledge of, this breach having occurred.
So yeah, of course he did. He had, of course he had the meetings,
Right.
and of course he knew, and of course he wasn't going to say anything. What's the worst that would have happened if he would have just notified the FTC and everyone that he needed to that this breach had happened?
See, that's why it was surprising to me. That's why, like I said, I struggle to understand, why it would have been his motivator to kind of cover this up, because at the end of the day, he personally at this point doesn't have any skin in the game. Right. I mean, yes, he's the CISO. Yes, this is his responsibility. Yes, this incident happened, but that's part of the job. And really how you're judged, it's not the end of the world when the breach happens. I think everyone in this profession understands that they're inevitable. You're right. Judged on how you handle the incidents. And so I think, the right thing to do would have been to, work with counsel inside and outside, contact your incident response firm, assuming, I'm sure Uber had like a Mandiant or a firm like that, or PwC, you name it, on call, and go through the steps, right?
Right.
Contain the damage, remediate what you can, restore your systems back to operability. And when you figure out, who was impacted, contact them in the ways you're supposed to contact them, provide them with, whatever kind of LifeLock that everyone, gives out these days, like candy when there's a breach.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I don't think he would have, really suffered any individual consequences had he, gone about those steps.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, you just walked through. This is what you're supposed to do. This is something. This process, as you know, it's not a question of if. It's usually a question of when, and usually it's a matter of, well, it's not your first time being attacked, so you should be used to going through this process. This is a process that's gone through by companies every single day of mitigating, working through the breach, and forming everything else. And
even if it doesn't happen, you practice it.
Even if it doesn't happen, you practice it, because you need. It's like Mike Tyson says, everyone's got a plan until you get hit in the mouth, and then the plan goes out the door. So you need to be practicing these things all the time. It's amazing to me that we have someone in that, and let's mention that again, a former federal prosecutor. He knows what time it is. He knows how these things actually operate, what he's supposed to be doing. And he doesn't. I mean, that's amazing. And you mentioned, I mean, the only real motivator there is that pride. He doesn't want to interfere with his career, whatever's going on there, even though that really wouldn't have, because CISOs across the planet go through this every single day. I really don't get that. I'm with you on that. I don't understand the how you go from knowing what you're supposed to do to, well, I think it'll be a good idea if we'll pay them off $100,000. We'll take their word that they deleted the data, and we'll just hide it all. I mean,
that's why I brought up that one comment that I read on the NPR report, where he was kind of stepping, I think, a little bit beyond scope, right, in terms of making product recommendations and things like that. It just, maybe it's a little bit of arrogance. I don't know, right? Like what would drive someone in that situation. But
and what year was this again? I forgot.
Well, the breach that he was employed at Uber that really set off this chain of events happened in 2016, but was publicly disclosed in 2017. Shortly after the new CEO was put into place. All
right. So that means, and the reason I asked that, so nowadays, Web 3.0, all this other crap that's coming online, the metaverse, whatever that means, everyone's worried about privacy. But back 2016, 2017, not so much at that point. You think it was maybe, so I'll ask you, and this is just your opinion on this. Do you think there were a lot of CISOs that were around at that point that were looking at different ways that you could use the incoming data that was being acquired, or not?
That would be a little bit unusual. And the reason why I say that is that you did kind of hit on a point. Privacy and security are two different things.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of overlap. right? We all know the various privacy standards like GDPR and CCPA, have varying degrees of prescriptive data protection controls and things like that you need to apply in your environment to be compliant. But, thinking about, how to use, cell phone geolocation data and things like that to monitor the safety of your drivers, that's kind of like next level snooping, so to speak.
I agree.
And maybe that's rooted in the fact that he was a former federal prosecutor. And when you think about, how do you track criminals down, right? Or how do you, behavioral activity, they use things like cell phone data to do that.
So what was Sullivan charged with at the end of it? And what was he convicted of?
So it's interesting. See, he was charged initially with obstruction of justice, 18 USC 1505.
So all federal charges, or were there state charges as well?
Federal is all that I saw. And this was
Okay.
brought by the Northern California U.S. Attorney's Office, I believe, or DOJ. And then he was also charged with misprison of felony, which is that he had, I believe they had knowledge that a federal felony had been committed and took affirmative steps to conceal it.
Okay.
And that's 18 USC 4 if anyone's interested. Now, that said, later on, they tried to layer on some wire fraud charges that I did not see in this conviction. So I think—
Is that because of the sending of the 100K or what?
Yeah, I saw that afterwards that they tried to layer on some wire fraud charges, maybe doing what prosecutors tend to do, right? Like turn the heat up with everything that we can lay on you, and then maybe you plea down, right? Okay, I'll drop that if you accept the other. But I did not see that he was convicted for that. He was convicted for obstruction of justice and taking affirmative steps to conceal a felony.
All right. So, and you make a good point there. And certainly that's been my experience with prosecutors is, hey, you can accept a plea agreement or we will give you 4 or 5 times the amount that we're offering for you to sign off on. And we're going to continue to pile any and every charge that we can on you to pressure you into doing this. Was Sullivan, did he accept a plea agreement or did he take it to trial?
So my understanding is, and this is sort of what's a little head scratching for me, because as you know, most cases plea out.
Absolutely.
It's
the smart ones.
Yeah, it's not that typical that you would roll the dice on a trial. My understanding is he was convicted by jury.
See, now that's interesting. As you know, and the audience may not, the federal system has about an 87% conviction rate. Over 90% of those convictions are because of plea agreements. And they mean that. Usually what happens is you get a federal prosecutor in front of a jury. The jury is absolutely going to believe that prosecutor. And to be honest with you, they don't even try to charge you unless they have enough evidence to convict you. So when you're charged federally, that really is, excuse my language, that's your ass. The best thing you can do is plea and hope for the best. So he did not plea. He gets convicted of obstruction, misprison of a felony. What type of time is he? He's not been sentenced yet. So what kind of time is he looking at?
I know that it's definitely multiple years in prison. I don't remember he has not been sentenced yet.
Right.
But I think it could be as much as like 5 years in prison. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I apologize if I got that wrong, but I think it could be like 5 years in prison and like a $500,000 fine.
Right.
There's some sentencing guidelines that are associated with this.
Yeah, I don't know what, and for listeners who don't know, in federal guidelines, what you do is you go through your criminal history, and then the dollar amount and the severity of the crime. There's actually a graph there, and you go X and Y, and you figure out the amount of time, and it gives a sentence range of so many months. You don't get sentenced in years, you get sentenced in months. Like my sentencing range was initially 60 to 75 months, and that's how they go with these things. For Sullivan, and just to go a little bit further in explanation, the crimes themselves with which I was charged with, they carried a maximum penalty of 20 to 25 years. But I would have never gotten that because of my criminal background, dollar amount, victim amount, things like that. Sullivan is probably much the same way. His maximum may be 5 to 10 years, but probably he would never get that. Typically on an obstruction charge, you're looking at 6 to around 14 months, I think is what that time is on that. I'm not sure what the time is on the other charge, but I would anticipate that he does less than 2 years, where he is a former prosecutor. I would anticipate some of that is either right now on home confinement. He may have an ankle monitor on right now. He may.
I doubt he has his passport, right? I mean,
he does not have a passport. You can bet on that one. But usually what happens is for white collar guys like that, especially coming in from law enforcement, they'll put him on an ankle monitor while he's going through the sentencing phase. And that time counts toward whatever the sentence is. So if they sentence him to, say, 18 months, which is probably around what he'll get, they'll sentence him to 18 months. 6 of that will be on home confinement. So that gets you down to 12, and then he'll get halfway house. So he'll go to a camp, minimum security prison. He'll go to a camp, and the actual camp time while he's there, he'll do 7-8 months. And then he'll be released to a halfway house for a month, and then he'll go home again on home confinement. And that'll be his prison time at that point. That's typically how white collar guys are sentenced, unless you're a guy like me that escapes from prison. And then they do things differently at that point.
And I did look it up. It's 5 years, you're right, on the obstruction, and 3 on the misprison.
Okay. So
I don't know if they do it, concurrently or.
Yeah, that'll run concurrent. All sentences run concurrent unless you have something like aggravated identity theft, then it's consecutive. He doesn't have any worries like that. So he's got a maximum of 5. I would imagine because of his history, he'll have people talk well for him, everything else. I imagine 18 months will be what he's sentenced to.
This makes me wonder why he didn't plea. Unless,
and there may, let's be honest, there may not have even been a plea offered if it was just going to be 18 months all the way around. I mean, it would be a little insane not to offer a plea because prosecutor's office saves money at that point. But I mean, if you can't really cut any time off of that, I mean, he's only going to do 6-7 months in prison to begin with. I would advise, I don't know if he'll watch this episode, but anyone who's watching this episode, there are a few rules, even in a minimum security prison, that you probably want to take and pay attention to. The first is you don't gamble. So you get a lot of prisoners that, they'll wager on football games, baseball, basketball, whatever. They'll wager on anything and everything. You don't want to be involved in that. You never want to owe someone money. And if you do wager, if you win, you're probably going to piss someone off. And I literally have seen people half beaten to death over a honey bun. Somebody wagers $1. I don't have a honey bun to pay you. Well, you're not going to pay me, so I'm just going to throttle you right here.
I mean, to be fair, honey buns are pretty good.
I mean, they are. They're and in prison, a honey bun. I still remember this, Rudy. A honey bun was 680 calories, and it was something when you've only got a diet of, say, 1,000 calories a day, that matters. So don't wager. Don't, you have to get used to using the restroom in front of other men. That's a big one. And that doesn't matter what security level you're in. You have to get used to that. And I'm not sure Mr. Sullivan has ever had to do that, but it takes some time. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling, and it's a very humiliating feeling that you, sadly enough, you get used to it as time goes on. And he's got a few months there, so he will get used to it. And it's something that you never forget.
Right.
So he'll have to get used to that. He'll have to get used to the noise. The noise is extreme. I mean, you've got people in there that think that they're rappers and they rap 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You've got people who have sleep apnea without the machines, so they're snoring. I mean, the noise is something that is mind-boggling. The capacity, the number of inmates there, you don't really have any privacy at all. So, you're, for example, the TV room, like he'll go in, say he serves 7 or 8 months. He'll never really be allowed in the television room because that's based on seniority. You have to be there so long, and you're basically given those Silatex block, the blocks on the floor, Your seating space is 4 of those. So just enough space to sit a plastic chair down. And the only way that you're allowed in there is if you've been in that prison long enough that someone leaves and you're next in line for that space. So they've got a white television room, they've got a Hispanic television room, and they've got an African-American television room. And you typically go where you are supposed to go because that's the way it works in those environments. So no television for him. Commissary. So in federal prison, when I was there, I think it was $300 a month. I think they've raised that to $350 a month that you're allowed to spend at commissary. And you can buy things like tuna. Tuna runs anywhere from $1, $1.50 is probably what it is now.
Now that's money that other people or you're like your own money that you get deposited every month.
So think of it, for anyone who's never been to prison, you used to go out to summer camp and you'd have commissary and you'd take some money around with you and maybe you'd give it to the main people at the camp to hold. Prison's really no different. You have family members that will send money into your account. You have a commissary day once a week, Wednesday, Thursday, what have you. You have a commissary day and you'll go to commissary and you'll give them an order form and they will fill the order form. And on that, you can get chips, you can get a pint of ice cream, you can get maybe some Diet Coke, what have you. And you're allowed to spend up to $350 a month. And that's it. Now, I don't know if he'll owe any restitution or not. Sounds like he's going to have a fine. So he will probably have to pay some of that commissary money toward his fine. So instead of $350 a month, he may only be able to spend, $275, something like that is what will happen. So that'll take place there. I'm trying to think of other things that the overcrowded environment really gets to you in prison because there is absolutely no real place that you can go to have any privacy at all. So if he's never really been in a situation like that, that will have an effect on him as well. I mean, it's really a completely different type of environment. He's very fortunate that he's going to a minimum security. In one respect, he's fortunate because you don't really have to worry about being extorted. There's not a whole lot of violence in minimum security institutions. Most everyone is coming down. They've all got under 10 years on a prison sentence, and all these guys are going to be getting out of prison. So they're trying to behave because they don't want to be booted back up to a higher class of security. So that's the benefits of it. But the drawbacks of a minimum security prison is that there's simply not a whole lot of stuff to do there.
I was going to say, I mean, are there the typical sort of prison jobs, so to speak, that are available, to kill the time?
So what happens, and thank you for bringing that up. So federal prison, everyone has to have a job. In my presentations, I say it doesn't really matter what you do, but you've got to have a job. You do have to have a job. Most everyone starts in the kitchen, and I have no doubt that's where Sullivan will start as well. He can roll utensils up in napkins. They may have him in the bakery. They may have him sweeping and mopping the floor, but most everyone starts in the kitchen unless he's got an in someplace with, say, education or landscaping or something like that. But he will absolutely have some sort of manual labor type of job that he has to do, for 4 or 5 hours a day. Everyone does that unless you've got some medical condition where you simply cannot perform those duties.
Right.
That will happen with him. He will, as a former federal guy, he's going to have some static. He is.
I was going to ask you, I mean, his background as a federal prosecutor, he's probably not going to be bumping into anyone he put in jail. Right. But again, I don't know how that's perceived.
It's not taken well. It's not. I served time back in the early 2000s in Atlanta. There were a couple of Atlanta cops that served a search warrant improperly at the wrong address. They went in, old woman, African-American was there, and they killed her, shot her dead. Then these 2 Atlanta cops, they got scared. They went and got crack cocaine and planted on the lady. I don't know if you remember this story or not, but I served time with the main cop in that. And they left him alone. We were at a medium. They left him alone, but no one associated with him anyway. That's exactly what will happen with Sullivan. You'll have people that will associate with him. because, he's got a tech experience. They'll try to learn things from him. You always have that type of inmate that tries to do that. But most of the other inmates, once they hear that he's a federal prosecutor or former prosecutor, they'll shy away from him. He won't be allowed in the TV room at all because of that. That becomes a lot of the issue. With a minimum security, again, if it were to higher security, he wouldn't be allowed in the television room. He might get extorted. He wouldn't be allowed on the, if you had exercise weights, he wouldn't be allowed to lift weights. He would have a certain group of people that he would be allowed to talk with, and usually that would be the child predators, because you're grouped in that type of circle of people.
That's a fantastic club to be in.
Exactly. But minimum security, you don't have any sexual predators on that compound. The people, again, are coming down, so they're not looking about getting any more time or being sent back to higher level of security or anything else like that. So he's not going to have a lot of problems with that. His main problem will be the in an environment that's overcrowded, learning to use the restroom in front of other people, the noise, working manual labor, because I'm sure he doesn't want to do that. I don't know how old the guy is, but if he's like me, I'm too old to do that shit now. So he'll have to get used to that. And
what about internet access? Because I imagine anyone coming from our type of role, right? We're used to being in front of a computer all day and having access to information at our fingertips whenever we want it.
So he will not have any internet access. He will, though, have the ability to email people at, I think it's either 15 or 20 cents a minute. It may be 10 cents a minute that you can send emails out, and all those emails are monitored. You don't have a web browser or anything else. I mean, it's just it's bare bones system is what that is. He'll have that access. He'll be able to make a phone call. He can use the phone all he wants to at 15-minute increments. Those are, I forgot what they charge for those calls. I think it's like $3 a piece is what they charge for the call. But that's the environment that this guy is going into. And worse than that, so, with Sullivan, he sent people to prison, and he got to see what that looked like. Now he gets to experience that on the other side. And I'll tell you now that you spend a lot of time you're drug dealer, you're violent criminal. You don't really think about things. You just become angry and you blame it on everyone else. I don't think Sullivan's going to do that. I think that Sullivan's going to spend those 7 or 8 months that he's actually behind the fence. I think he's going to spend that really thinking about this decision he made to try to cover this thing up. That's what I think is going to really tug at him every single day, that, he's not only in prison, but he lost his career. What's he going to do when he gets out? Okay, yeah, he can do some speaking. All right. But is that the only thing he's going to speak on? Because if it is, his tenure as a speaking, keynote speaker or whatever is very short-lived at that point. So what's he going to do when he gets out? I think that's going to be a lot of what's tugging at him every single day. He's not going to be a CISO anymore. No one's going to hire the guy.
Even if Cloudflare kind of looked away, since none of these things have been, proven in court yet. We all know what the surveys look like from third parties, from the insurance providers that are providing cyber insurance. They ask details about who's running your program, the people involved. And I'm pretty sure, being convicted of a federal felony is going to be a level of risk and something that you don't want to have to constantly explain, no matter how talented an individual is.
Well, you mentioned it right there, the insurance companies. So I'm chief criminal officer with Arcos Labs. That chief criminal officer is a contract position, because insurance companies would not allow Arcos to hire me directly. Right. Not only that, but those same insurance companies, I'm not allowed to look at data. I'm not allowed access to these things that any other C-level position might be allowed access to. No, because I'm a risk. And Sullivan is going to have those exact same risks and standards placed upon him. He's not going to have the opportunities, nowhere near them, that he had prior to breaking the law.
Yep.
So I mean, it's now what gets me is at the beginning of the show, you were talking about how you woke up that morning and you were, the thread was, you can go to prison for a breach. He's not going to prison for a breach.
if we went to prison for breaches, we'd have to build a new prison for a lot of CISOs.
We would. Yeah, breaches do not put one in prison. How you handle that, if you break the law trying to cover it up, that will and should land you in prison. Absolutely, it should.
Yeah, I think, one thing not to get, too far in the weeds and sort of like a social justice, mindset around this, but I think in general, white collar crime is under prosecuted, and that is something that is a thorn in society, right? When they look at people that, like the quintessential rob a liquor store, go to jail, right? Why does that person who steals $100 go to jail, but someone that steals millions of dollars, in a financial crime, go unscathed? Like,
Right.
Many of the banking leaders, right, that have that during various financial crises, and they went back and they looked at things, and you find out that no one got prosecuted for anything.
Right.
And they're like, billions of dollars were vaporized, through all kinds of questionable means. No one paid a price, right? So I'm not really of the camp that's dismissive of what he did and saying, oh, well, no one really got harmed or this or that. No, people did get harmed. And specifically, one of the things that came out was that he was aware of these hackers, right? Because they knew their names. They got their names because they had them subsequently sign another NDA with their names. And other companies were breached by them afterwards.
Oh.
So this is what kind of shocked me when I saw, people within, I think in particular, the Silicon Valley social scene where I used to operate, come out and defend him and say, oh, he shouldn't be the only one. They're making him a fall guy. Even if all of that's true, he still, you can't dispute, had knowledge of these people who were attacking companies like his.
He knew their names.
And he knew their names.
Yeah.
And because they were able to continue to operate, and by the way, both of them were eventually arrested and convicted.
But not because of assistance of Mr. Sullivan.
No, right? So other companies that these same people who are kind of coming out and being apologists for him, your company might have been a target of these attackers because he did nothing.
Well, I think that's
that's where I kind of, it rubs me a little bit.
Well, I mean, it runs me more than a little bit, because you've paid them off, you've sent them on their merry way, their actual identities, and then what, do you think they're going to stop? No, they're not going to stop. So then these guys go off and hit other companies. Meanwhile, excuse my language, you're sitting on your ass, not doing anything. You know who the people are.
Right.
But you're keeping your mouth shut. Yeah, you deserve some prison time for that. Absolutely you do.
And you say people aren't impacted. I mean, look, your personal information is stolen. Yeah. Brett, I mean, you're the expert on this.
I am.
You know exactly what can happen to people's individual lives when their personal information is stolen, exploited, credits established in their names, debts taken out in their names. I mean, that you can really get people's lives pretty sideways.
Well, you can destroy someone's life. You really can. And once that breach happens, I've talked about it enough on my show and any other show that anyone listens to me on. Someone gets hit, they get their identity compromised. That's when this stuff starts, and it never stops. It never stops. The PII doesn't change. Your social's not going to change. If whatever else they steal, that's not going to change. It's just, I really don't understand how someone can make a decision like that. I really don't. I don't get how it's very easy to have done the right thing. It's very easy to have worked with the attorneys, reported to the FTC, reported to California, let everyone know everything that's going across the board. You continue making those buku dollars as the CISO of Uber, and you continue to build your career up to who knows what level. But instead of that, you make this decision to hide everything, to pay off criminals, send those criminals on their merry way, who, let's be honest, they didn't delete any of the stolen data. They resold that on whatever criminal marketplace was around at that point. That would have been Alphabay. And from what I remember about Alphabay in 16 and 17, they had a shitload of Uber data that was on there. And so they resold that data, and then they went and attacked other companies while the CISO of Uber knew who they were and didn't report any of that to law enforcement. That's about
intentionally did things to make sure it did not.
Right. That's about as bad as you can get. And
because there's one thing to lie by omission and not say anything. There's another thing to, proactively take steps to hide something, right? So
and I want to thank you for coming on here, because I've seen people on LinkedIn as well apologizing for the guy, trying to justify his actions. There's no justification for that whatsoever. That's about as bad as you can get. Being in that position, that's about as bad as you can get right there.
Yeah, when I think about, the worst things that could happen in my role, the only thing worse than that would be, some type of, security incident that results in loss of life, right? Like that's the extreme.
That's it.
But
that's it. Or become a CISO of one of these coin exchanges and
right.
I mean, good Lord, Rudy. I mean, it's pretty disheartening when you think about it. It's pretty disheartening that we've got a guy that did this. Do you think it's going to send a message to the other CISOs out there of, hey, if you're ever thinking about not reporting, if you're ever thinking about not doing the right thing, of just trying to minimize or cover up, that this is what happens to you at the end of the day?
I'm hopeful of that because, intertwined in the commentary were people saying those things. So not everyone was oblivious to the matter.
Right.
But a lot of folks read the headline and they saw the narrative that was being portrayed by, people that can make money off of this narrative, right? So, you have the various vendors that, use techniques like FUD to influence buy decisions. And
there's a whole lot of vendors that do that.
Yeah, you're going to get, I'm sure I'll get an email or more than that from vendors saying, hey, Rudy, here's how our product can keep you out of jail, right? I mean, they will go so far as to say something as obnoxious as that and use something like this incorrectly to try and sell the products. So, but I think that over time, if people get more information about what the case was about, what actions were taken, I think it'll end up having a net positive for people in this role and in the security industry in general as a guardrail, right?
Right.
Hey, sometimes it is tough to do the right thing when a breach happens, and I've been involved in that. Everyone kind of puckers up. That's not what you wanted to wake up to that day. But like everything in life, everyone has that human instinct to say, okay, I want to hide it for a second. But I think this could serve as a guardrail to kind of snap you back into your senses and say, no, let's start, firing off our incident response plan. Let's take the right steps and just see it through.
I hope so. I mean, I really do. And I saw some of those comments too of, the people that were they knew what was going on and they had the proper type of response, not the apologist or anything else like that. I also did get a couple of emails from questionable, I say questionable companies, but from companies that were using fear, uncertainty, and doubt in order to try to sell product. And what I would say is that if you receive an email from someone who's trying to scare you into buying a product, who's using a news story like this, don't go to prison, sign on with us.
Right.
What I would do is I would make sure not to do any business with them whatsoever, ever, from that point in time. I don't care what the company is. I really don't. I don't think that that's the way that you need to do business. I think if you have a good product and it works, people will come to you without having to scare them to death, paint the attacker as, untouchable, use some guy going to prison as an excuse, things like that. Just my opinion.
No, I agree.
All right, Rudy, I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Brett.
Anything else you want to talk about before we sign off?
No, again, appreciate the work you're doing. Your podcast is great, and looking forward to listening to more in the future, man.
Rudy Rouhana, the man, the muse, the inspiration of this show. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll get this show out ASAP.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you. All right, and that is it for the Brett Johnson Show. I want to take the moment to thank Rudy Rouhana for coming in. He's an attorney. He's a CISO. He is an outstanding human being. He truly is. I completely respect the man. He is on point with every single thing, and I wish we had more human beings on the planet like him. I also want to take a moment to just to end with this. I served 7.5 years in federal prison. During that 7 years, I was very, very fortunate that I always had someone that took me in under their wing, that gave me advice on how to navigate the prison environment, of how to become a better person overall. One of the people that I had, I was at Lexington County, South Carolina, at the county jail there. This gentleman was coming down, meaning that he had been in prison for 25 years, and he was getting out of prison. And as you get out, there's some, maybe some red tape you have to go through, things like that. So you may have to go through the county jail and then be released from there. He was at the county jail coming down, and he took a liking to me. No, not a sexual liking. He took a liking to me. And we were walking one day, and he tells me, he's like, Brett, he said, you can make prison whatever you want to make it. The best thing you can do is find out what you don't like about yourself and change that. If you're out of shape and you want to get in shape, you can do that. If you want to get an education, you can do that. Find what you don't like about yourself and take this as an opportunity to change yourself. And I took that to heart. Over the years, I've always remembered that man. I don't remember his name, but I've remembered him. And I've remembered what he said. And I will say the same thing to Joe Sullivan. This is an opportunity for you to sit back and think about your life and the things that you don't like. I know that you did not consider the people that you were hurting when you made your decision to break the law. You didn't think about your family. You didn't think about your friends. You didn't think about your peers in the cybersecurity industry. You didn't think about the thousands of victims for which you are responsible. But I hope that you have the time to do that now. And I hope that you take that time, because I have found that considering your victims, including yourself, considering your victims has a lot of benefit. It really makes you a better person overall. So I hope that you take that opportunity to do that. I gave some pointers during Rudy's talk. You need to be well-mannered. Unfortunately, Mr. Sullivan did not do any jail time. Jail is very good about teaching someone the proper etiquette to have in prison. If you don't go to jail first, you usually end up in prison. And when you do, you don't know how to conduct yourself, and you get yourself in a little trouble. Mr. Sullivan's not going to do a lot of time, I would not expect. I wish he would do more than what he's supposed to be getting, because, he was entrusted to do the right thing. He certainly knew the difference between right and wrong, being a former federal prosecutor, and he chose to disregard that and act for his own benefit, to the detriment of thousands of people and to an entire industry. So I hope he takes the time to think things through and change his life. He certainly has never. Mr. Sullivan, I wish you the best. I don't expect you to listen to this episode, but I wish you the best. I hope that you become a better person out of this. I hope you're able to just be a better man overall. I wish you well. I do. I hope you overcome everything. I hope that you understand that the only person that's responsible for where you are is you. That's it. Nobody else. You. Try not to get your ass in trouble in prison. I don't think you will, because you're in a minimum security. I don't think you'll get in any trouble at all. But, don't wager. Try to make the most of your stay and go from there. My name is Brett Johnson. What do we say? We say, stay safe, stay secure, and stay vigilant. More than that, I am Brett Johnson. And as you watch this show or listen to this show, realize that, hey, I used to be on YouTube. Today I'm not. I got banned. That's all right. because now I'm on Spotify, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Apple Podcasts, I'm on Stitcher, I'm on iHeartRadio, I'm on all over the place, including Rumble, and I think I'm going to go over to Twitch before it's over. So tune in to me. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen. As I said, stay safe, stay secure, stay vigilant, but understand at the end of the day, the most important thing always is to just do the right damn thing. That's what it's all about. That is what it's all about. My name is Brett Johnson. Thank you for listening. Until next time.